Hello, folks. Today I'm joined by Piers Brand from Plastic Soldier Company. Some of you from the site may be aware of his work as far as painting goes, but he's also been heavily involved with Northag, the new Cold War Gone Hot game from Plastic Soldier. So, Piers, do you want to tell me a bit about yourself and how you wound up in this tiny box?
Yeah, God knows. I've been working on Battlegroup and Northag with Warwick for since about 2012, and I do little bits on the side for PSC. So I'm kind of their go-to if they need anything sort of historical planned out or models looked at and things like that. So I have my fingers in a lot of pies. So I'm more the janitor for Battlegroup than the creator.
I feel your pain.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my side of things. Personal-wise, I've been wargaming for far too long. Generally just World War II and that sort of historicals, but a bit of other stuff as well. So
I have seen you. I've seen you appear sometimes, especially when Warwick's been doing something like Soldiers of God or Soldiers of the Empire, getting in there with a bit of playtesting.
Yeah. Soldiers of Rome is done, and Soldiers of God. There's and we're looking at outside of PSC. Me and him are looking at a Vietnam game, and then he's threatening to do Soldiers of Napoleon. Is the next thing he's threatening me with.
That's, the devil makes work for idle hands.
Exactly.
So obviously today the big thing is the release of Cold War Gone Hot, starting in 1983. Warwick sat down with John and they had a bit of a chat about the book itself. But what I want to speak to you about is the plans around that and where you're planning on going from here, because Warwick was very much of get the book out there and let people loose, but it is just Soviets and British. And I know an awful lot of people will look at that and go, it's very narrow bound. Now I know when I've looked at some of Warwick's stuff in the past, he prefers to go a tight, narrow field so they can get the accuracy there and get the gameplay there, rather than do something that is more broad in scope and loses the historical gameplay for that. So we've got this Soviet-British encounter in Northag, but I'm assuming there are plans. I know he's mentioned that Germans are coming.
I think the way to look at Northag is to look at it as the core rule book, if you like.
Yeah.
And the two army lists in there are very much the start of something else. So it's more the rule book, if you like. Mm-hmm. What's going to follow that in probably next year is a book called Centag, which is Central Army Group. But that's actually more going to be a book of lists. So that will be your West Germans, East Germans, Americans, Czechs, all those sort of things, like Soviet naval infantry, different bits and pieces, probably another British list for more reserve forces. And the idea is that will then bring all the other lists together. So it'll be a sort of like a 2-book game, 2 little softback books, and you'll have all the forces in there and the army list. And then obviously the models that will be associated with those by as well.
That's the other thing. The models themselves, even though the book itself, Northag, is being released with a slew of 10mm figures, it's not actually a 10mm game. It's multi-scale, the same as standard Battlegroup.
It's like everything. It tries to be as scale agnostic as possible. And Northag especially is sort of anywhere between 10, 6mm, 15mm. Any of those will play fine. And PSC have chosen to go with 10mm because it seems to suit. It seems to suit Will, who runs PSC, suits his sort of Goldilocks size of detail on the models, recognisable, but also that you can play on a 6x4 and get quite a large sort of battle on that without it becoming overcrowded with models.
Well, 15 or 20mm, it looks great, but for modern or near modern warfare, it does bog down very quickly. Ranges exceed the length of most people's tables, and I think that's so 10mm is probably not a bad shout to go for.
Yeah, and it does look very nice on the table, especially with the model railway scenery that you could use. And there's quite a bit available now from different companies, not just PSC. So there's quite a big amount of choice now in the sort of 10, 12 mil market.
Sure. Speaking of the models themselves, then, this is part of a new range, essentially, from PSC, which is the Ultracast. You've had a chance to get your hands on some of the individual figures. How does that compare? I've seen painted versions online where it's difficult to tell metal from Ultracast and vice versa. But from a modelling and painting point of view, what do you think of the actual material and the range itself?
It's I'm a person that doesn't particularly like. I like plastic kits, obviously, because I do 20 mil, so I use an awful lot of them. But
sure.
I've never been one for sort of bendy plastics. I just can't deal with that. An Ultracast fits it. It's kind of like a sort of, it's a plastic, but the nearest thing I can liken it to the Legion figures, the Star Wars Legion models, that sort of material. Yeah. And it does have a slight flex in it. The beauty of it is I've been painting them without washing them, without even priming the models. And the paint doesn't come off. They paint very much like you're painting a metal model. There's a slight texture to it. So it doesn't have that sort of complete smoothness of resin or plastic.
Yeah.
So they're very nice to paint. The real beauty of them, though, is the fact that they're so lightweight, and they're also virtually indestructible. So where I've got metal models that will chip from use in 10 mil, these just don't. And the gun barrels, because there's that bit of flex in them, they'll actually bend rather than
snap off or
bend and stay bent. These will just flip back to their original position. And the nice thing is under normal tolerances that the paint doesn't split or come off. So it at the moment, from a reasonably partial, unbiased point of view, it looks to be the perfect material for something like this. Yeah. And of course, the 15 mil figures are being done in it as well. So far, it's looking really good that this will be a good way to go forward. And obviously, it's so much cheaper than traditional plastic kit. Yeah. You know, and for something of a small scale, that makes it feasible to do all the vehicles you need in a list. So rather than releasing sort of 2 or 3 key vehicles, PSC can actually do everything that you need in that army list in Northag. They can do the whole lot. And again, it'll be the same for whatever arms are released from Centag, which I think is quite a difference, because you don't often, especially in historicals, you don't often find you can go to one place and buy everything. No. Generally, even if you can find infantry, then you're having to go elsewhere for your vehicles. And exactly, if you can find the vehicles in the infantry, then you're going, well, they don't do any aircraft or any helicopters, and at that point, you're off looking for scale models to do the same sort of thing. So having a one-stop shop where you can get whatever you need for the specific army you're playing is a great benefit. So we're looking at Soviets and we're looking at British for the release, but what are the plans down the line then? Do you already have the next year's worth mapped out, or is it just a very broad stroke sort of this year Soviets and British? Due to the conditions we're in at the moment,
everything's broad strokes.
Things are a little bit up in the air, but certainly I've just written out the third wave of releases for the Soviets and the British Army of the Rhine. So that's sort of, those are going into design at the moment. So the first wave is what's coming out today with Northag. The second wave are going into production now. So a month or so after Northag's out, there'll be another whole release of models. And then that'll get followed by the sort of third wave, which will be the remainder. And then straight after that, we're going in to look at the design for the West German kit, other Soviet kit that's used by Warsaw Pact and American stuff as well. So it's quite a sort of continuous stream of models to come out for Northag, because there's quite a design process to go through. Fortunately, the moulding process is that much quicker, because it's a much more traditional rubber mould rather than any sort of steel mould. So it becomes a lot quicker and cheaper from that side of things. So we can sort of get stuff produced and ready for release, so that rather than just releasing Centag with 1 or 2 sort of box sets, hopefully we'll be able to hit that with sort of 2 complete armies, and then bring the rest out online when it comes out. Probably at Salute next year, I imagine that'll be the.
I suppose a nice thing about the likes of Northag and Centag is because they are NATO forces, there's an awful lot of overlap in there. So it's once you've got the core of the vehicles out there, it is just picking those specific pieces that you need to do to flesh out the ranges on both sides. So
yeah, and it gives you lots of room for players to pick and choose what sort of NATO forces they want to do, especially. So we're still umming and ahhing how we do the list for NATO, whether we do lots of individual ones for like Belgium and France. France will be its own, but for like sort of Belgium, Holland, things like that, or if we just do sort of a NATO list, and then people can pick and choose the bits out of that list that represent the country they want to do. But the idea is to try and cover literally everything for Cold War in Europe. I particularly, for some reason, want to have a Swedish army list. I don't know why, but mainly because I just like S-tanks.
I was going to say, it's the S-tanks, isn't it? It's being able to look over a hill and then shoot and then just back away very quietly.
Exactly,
Everyone knows strips.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought of doing some sort of game set in Scandinavia would be kind of different as well. You know?
It is. And I'd never really appreciated the beauty of an S-tank until I visited the Army Museum in Stockholm, and they have one sitting in the court in front of it, and you can walk right past it. And I was coming out after having had a meal, and there was two soldiers cleaning it. One of them was standing on top of it with a Henry Hoover hoovering. And that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. Just seeing Henry's red little face sucking away at the dust on an S-tank. Go, well, this is my whole day is now complete. So no, I definitely see. It's weird that you mention that, because it's rare that when people mention Cold War gone hot that they go north, whereas obviously in World War II you had the Winter War up in Finland, you had the Soviets hitting that speed bump, and in a 1980s alternate past where everything kicks off, they would come through Finland, and they probably wouldn't be stopped by a single man with his sniper rifle taking out all of, that they would steamroller through there, push into Sweden, push into Norway, and all of a sudden they'd be sitting on the North Sea in a more advantageous position. And that, I think, gets missed a lot. I'm certain I can't think of another game that covers that area.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something from the sort of the background I think we'd like to explore, because you've also got anything sort of Norway, Sweden, you've got all the Baltic naval forces for the Warsaw Pact. And also allows us to bring in the Royal Marines and the US Marines and their sort of landing forces. So there's has a real nice sort of mix of different bits and pieces to game up there. So it's finding those little niches that we can sort of bring out and give people different ideas, different terrain and things.
Even with, I'm going to say modern, but talk about the 1980s, but with modern aircraft, they could have dropped from Chinooks or like. You could have regiments being deployed from Scotland into Norway much easier than would have been done in World War II's, where you didn't have that same issue when obviously Germany took Norway. So it was a lot more of a proposition to land troops there, whereas it's a 45 to an hour flight there and back. So deploying paratroops, deploying special services onto Norwegian soil when it's being held by Russia is more of a proposition that could be very interesting to explore.
Yeah, I think it's finding those little niches that people haven't perhaps thought of. Another idea that was sort of bandied about is what will go on sort of in southern Europe and possibly out into the Middle East. And that sort of feeds into, depending on how Centag goes, how the game sort of develops from there. Because I know Will at PSC is quite keen on something for Arab-Israeli war, because you've got the models. So once the models are done, it's a matter of seeing what else you can fit in with those. And with something like Arab-Israeli, it can be a more historical base setting.
Yeah, and then you can branch out from there. And there's an awful lot of mix in the Middle East, where you have countries that today would be very much anti-West were our allies at that point in time, and the map in the Middle East where you're fighting changes quite considerably. Just pulling it back to 83, so that's definitely one to check out if it's been penciled in.
There's a lot of scope for different things away from that more traditional sort of view of a Cold War that is full to gap and hordes of Russian tanks across the plains as the Americans and the British shoot at them, So it'd be nice to include all of that sort of traditional feel, but also I hope we have the space to sort of pull in these more sort of esoteric things, because those sort of periods and those sort of areas will be what keep people interested in the genre. For myself, there's only so many times I can play those traditional Charge of the Light Brigade sort of scenarios before I desire something a bit weirder.
You've done it once, you've done it 5 times, and it doesn't matter if the rules change slightly. The scenario themselves has been played to death. Yeah, you're correct. It's one of the things I look for is the changes that make it a more interesting fight, or the things where you can explore the fringes of a more recognizable conflict.
And it's something that the Battlegroup and Northag do quite well, is allowing you to play those extra little pieces that some other games might necessarily not. The way the system works, because it's quite narrative, and because it's always different every time you play, and it has that sort of replayability, it lets you very easily sort of take it to different parts. And it as I say, there's so many options that may not be apparent at first with something like Cold War, that it'd be nice to explore with people.
Yeah. Well, that's Battlegroup Northag and the Cold War gone hot. But have you any plans for regular Battlegroup beyond that? Because obviously, if people have engaged in Battlegroup for the past 8 years, I think it is.
Yeah. Christ.
Obviously, seeing something like this appear, there's always that panic sets in that, I don't care about Cold War gone hot, I don't care about 1980s, what's going to happen to my game? Are there still plans beyond the current for standard Battlegroup?
Yeah. I mean, since PSC took over Battlegroup completely, they've done a full reprint, so everything apart from, I think, Blitzkrieg is currently back in print. And I know the rulebook has literally just sold out again. I think this is about the 8th print run, so that's out to reprint. They have Battlegroup Pacific that Warwick and myself completed quite a while ago, so that's ready to go to print. I think that's basically just waiting on new 15mm and 20mm Japanese and US Marines to be sculpted. So that should come out around summertime this year.
Very nice.
So, and that'll be something different for people, because you don't get that much stuff on World War II Pacific and Burma. So the book covers both the American involvement in late war in the Pacific and also the British in Burma. So it will be something different, and it's also different from the other Battlegroup books. Has a new chit set, and there's obviously, because it's focusing on the Japanese as well, there's quite a few little changes that come into it. So it's one of those risky titles where you don't know if people don't play it because there's not a book, or they don't play it because they're not interested. So
I have a sneaking suspicion. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's our very Europe focused, Europe centric. We're in Europe. We don't care what happened in the rest of the world. And I know obviously some American players of World War II are very focused because of family connections to the Pacific, and likewise in Australasia, Anzacs especially, who were pulled out en masse in about 42, 43. So their focus is nearly always on the Pacific, but we tend to ignore it, and it doesn't get seen as a particularly large part. But the Pacific was a monumental part of World War II that just sort of gets neglected. So.
And again, it's a different sort of terrain and different troops as well. And as I say, it was a bit of a risk to do it, I think. But we always wanted to include it in the sort of Battlegroup series. But we've both been surprised so far at how interested people are in it. So hopefully it will be something that sort of reignites people's interest in that side of the war, to sort of take it away from Europe for a bit. We'll see. But so that's due this summer, and then 2021 we're just starting on Stalingrad.
Right.
The sort of Eastern Front 1942 book, and that's going to be one of the big hardback jobs. And that's looking to be quite an epic book, because there's quite a lot to cover in it.
I imagine there will be, because I suppose you'll start with defence and then break out of Stalingrad, and then the push through Northern Europe and down, and there's an awful lot goes on there as well. I think people sometimes get fixated on the big fights. Also, they look at Stalingrad, they look at Berlin, but between Stalingrad and Berlin, there's an awful lot going on both north and south. I mean, all the way to the Baltic and the Black Sea.
Yeah, I mean, even in the 42 book, I mean, we're going to do the army lists for basically for the whole of the Eastern Front for 42. So it won't just be the Germans and the Russians, it'll be Romanians, Italians. But we also want to bring in, although obviously the book's focus will be on Stalingrad, we also want to bring in the fighting that was in the north of the Eastern Front, and the diversionary attacks that the Russians launched, and all those sorts of things. So, as always with Battlegroup, although it's the same as Kursk was themed, it's sort of like the 1943 book. This will be the sort of Eastern Front 42 book.
Sure, yeah.
And that should be hopefully around sort of salute time next year, if we get it written quick enough. As always,
if we get a salute.
If we get a salute, and if we can paint. If we can make Stalingrad for the photos by then.
There are probably volunteers out there.
Yeah, exactly. And then after that, I think PSC are very, very committed to finishing off what Warwick started with Battlegroup. So they've certainly said that there'll be an Italian front book. There'll be a Bagration book for Eastern Front 44, which I think is the real key sort of time, keys in with the Overlord book and everything there.
Sure.
And then possibly something on the West Wall, that sort of Hurtgen Forest type of thing for the Americans. And then after that's where we sort of had, that sort of covers everything we originally wanted to cover. But PSC are also looking at possibly a 1946 book, a sort of if the war between broken out between the Allies and the Soviets, and Warwick has been doing a little bit of sort of background work on that. And the other sort of fictional title that they were looking at is something on Operation Sea Lion or something like that.
Sea Lion's always interesting.
Yeah, I think so. But it's nice to see that PSC now they've taken over are very committed to not just Northag and bringing that out, but also keeping the Battlegroup stuff coming along. I think it's been a while since we had a book out, but it's things like Northag and getting the reprints done have just cut into the time and availability of doing stuff.
Just the writers, sculptors, and painters are a finite resource, and if your focus is currently on Northag, then it means it can't be on the Second World War, and vice versa. So
and also there was so much out of print because it went, the game sort of ticked along for a while and then suddenly became really popular. And with everything selling out, economy wise, you can't just reprint everything straight away. So it's been a sort of a good sort of 12 months to get everything back in print and get us to a point where we can now sort of look at new titles and say, right, okay, we can get Pacific out for the summer and then work on from that.
It always bodes well when books are coming back into print and then immediately going out again. It shows that there's a growth there, and people are after it, that there's a demand for it.
Yeah, I mean, the rule book I say has just gone out of stock again, so I think this will be the 9th print run of the rule book. So there's the guys are out there, the people are buying it. So We're slowly crawling. It's been an 8-year crawl to get anywhere.
If you print it, they will come. I'm pretty sure that's what it was in Field of Dreams, more or less. Yeah. So with Battlegroup being a different scale, and obviously with Plastic Soldier rocking multiple scales already, where we have in the past we've seen 28s, and obviously 20s and 15s are very popular as far as the hard plastics go, the hips. Are we going to see anything from 10mm creeping back into World War II, or is this solely going to be for the Cold War gone hot?
Well, PSC, as you know, have released the Mortem et Gloriam, the 15mm sort of Ancients and Medievals game with Simon Hall. Simon has 2 World War II games in development as well. One is called Men of Steel, which is sort of like a World War II skirmish that's aimed at sort of 20mm, 28mm figures. And then he has another game called Divisions of Steel, which is a much sort of smaller level game. So it looks like PSC will be doing 10mm World War II, using the Sidecast system and the Ultracast to produce, again, complete armies in sort of battle packs for the Division of Steel. Whether Northag gets converted back into a World War II version as well, I don't know. I don't know whether me and Warwick can do another.
The nice thing, you've already got a multi-scale system there.
Exactly.
If people want the 10mm themselves, they can work it out. It doesn't take much. Get a calculator.
We'll let them do it. We'll have a break.
It's certainly fascinating. I know I'd seen an interview with Simon where he had talked about with Meg Compendium being released and Paco and Maximus and Magma all being pulled into one book. And that going forward from PSC, then that gave him the opportunity to go back and revisit the World War II that he'd been toying with for a little while. So I mean, I think fascinating to see those.
I think he's hoping to have his Divisions of Steel out towards the end of this year. So it'd be nice if PSC can get a few 10mm World War II models to sort of plough along with that. And it's something that, because they can now look at these sorts of things with this new system. Hopefully people will take to it and will at least try it, because as always with any sort of new material, like when GW had the new stuff,
there's always teething problems. I know I have within arm's reach 4 or 5 different types of injection plastic or spun plastic or restic or whatever you want to call it, and they vary in quality from you couldn't tell it apart when it's painted, from metal or resin, to oh my god, just kill it now. And you have this brand, but it does take trying it, and in most cases, especially with the smaller scales, the 10mm, the 15, you don't need to worry too much about picking up the sort of details that people would see on 28s and 32mm large scale figures. They capture more than enough detail, and it's just that quick clean up with a knife.
And I think it does. I think that this sort of material does suit the smaller scales better. And I don't think anybody's really done much sort of 10mm in this sort of material. It's been resin and metal. So
I don't think I've seen anybody going.
It might be something that once people give it a go, hopefully for PSC it will be a sort of a new avenue to pursue, because if it works for the 15s and people like it, then PSC, obviously they've got the Lurkio ranges, which were Simon's. They've also got Zeist and 15mm.
Corvus Belli's 15mm.
Corvus Belli, which are stunning figures.
Really I know, and I've been waiting for those to come back.
Me too. Not that I've been on at PSC every week have you done them yet? No. Do you need any painting? But they're also looking at Napoleonics and things like that. And I think 50mm.
Certainly 15 or 10mm Napoleonics in this, where they can hammer it out. It's got a decent level of quality for the sculpts. It's light. It's fairly inexpensive compared to metals. It's certainly massively inexpensive compared to resins.
I think the 50 mils are
we were looking, they were roughly half, yeah, compared to the existing metal stocks. Oh, I know, I've priced these. Don't worry. the
first thing we all did, wasn't it?
The minute Will and Travis at PSC told me that this was coming, I was immediately scouring the internet, going, "Wow, it's a brave new world." They tell me.
I think so. Yeah, hopefully, if we can get through the current situation. Hopefully, next year there'll be a nice big salute with lots of shiny toys.
I imagine most people will be looking forward to Salute next year like they've never looked at it. People get spoiled. When it's there every year, there's a certain amount of people going, oh, it's always the same. And this year, with not having a Salute, people have realised just how much actually happens at Salute, how many companies not only rely on it, but also they hold back their releases for the year, or they hold back their big announcements for that weekend, and all of a sudden that weekend came and went, and people were left going, "What happened?"
Oh, so, it's very bizarre from our point of view, because I tend to run a demo game with the guys who do a few Brits in the hobby podcast. So to suddenly go from this sort of manic, Christ, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. You're building the boards, I'll paint this, you paint that. To suddenly it all just come to a screeching halt. Yeah, we've all just sat there going, what do we paint now?
What do we do? I can supply you some stuff if you need painting.
It's bizarre because we were all so geared up for sort of World War II to get it ready, and we've all just been painting like fantasy stuff and Warhammer 40k and things, just that sort of release of something different.
It's the way it goes. I'm quite impressed by this weekend because a lot of companies looked at Salute and went, it's not happening. We're going to announce everything for Salute weekend. And on the 18th, if you spent your entire day on the internet jumping from one website to another, to another, to another, to a page, to a page, to a page, you could kind of get an idea of what was going on. This makes so much more sense to me. Going, let's not do it on the 18th. Let's let everybody calm down, and then here is what we have for you. Here's what we would have had if Salute had been a thing. Yeah, and it's a much more relaxed way of doing it.
Exactly, and I think and there's so much to come as well. I mean, the with this Ultracast system, things for World War II. I mean, it's I know PSC have done some Kettenkrads and some German motorcycle troops in both 50mm and 20mm that I know they're hoping to get out in Ultracast fairly soon. So being able to buy like a whole 20mm motorcycle platoon for the Germans, which exactly, and it was always so expensive to do. And now looking at going, okay, I might be able to have that for 20 quid rather than like the 40, 50 quid or whatever it was,
It was always a dicey proposition whenever you went, they're going to move forward and then get off those bikes and we're not going to see the bikes for the rest of the game. It's just, buy bikes, we're infantry now. So
But it's at least with that sort of price margin, you can go, actually, you know what, I am going to have my Kradschützen platoon and we are going to ride on and get off.
It's the way to do it. It is the way to do it. Well, Piers, it's been fantastic catching up with you and getting the idea of the plans for Northag and Battlegroup going forward, and sort of the ideas behind PSC's sort of ventures for the rest of the year. Is there anything we've missed?
Don't think so. I mean, the only other we haven't mentioned are the stuff that's not PSC that Warwick's doing, which is the Vietnam game, NAM 68, that we're working on. So that will hopefully be sometime possibly early next year, which is a sort of 20mm, 28mm platoon game where you actually play a tour of duty as the platoon commander.
Well, what do you say? At some point, we'll get you and Warwick onto a group chat later on the year, and we'll have a little talk about that then, because that seems fascinating. I do like the idea of a tour of duty.
It's the first. I mean, I wrote Ambush Valley for Osprey and for Ambush Alley Games for their Vietnam rules, and it's really annoying when somebody else comes along and writes a game that's better than your own, and makes you play test it. They're going, yeah, it's all right, I suppose. It's a really good game. We've been play testing it last time I was over here in Ireland, and it's a completely new take on how to play Vietnam. It's really immersive.
That's fascinating.
And it's brilliant being the Americans, because you never know what's coming at you, the way the system works. So, definitely
we'll definitely get Warwick and yourself on and have an in-depth chat about that later on in the year.
Cool.
Things are moving along.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. You will probably have already been answering questions on the forum before people have seen this video. And if you're only coming across this video now, if you pop along to OnTableTop, you'll be able to have a look at the Q&A thread that Piers has hopefully been answering your questions and hasn't just gone off for Sunday dinner and ignored you all.
Taking the questions and asking Warwick.
Well, yeah, whatever's easiest.
Exactly.
Okay, folks, we're going to move on. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.